Hey, it's us again.
Good morning, YouTubers. We want to kind of, every morning that we wake up, we share coffee with you and Jesus. And we get our cup of coffee and we sit down, and it's like, what do you want to talk about today, Lord? Well, we've got a really good friend who is trying to put aside her fears and concerns and issues surrounding relationships, male female relationships. I mean, that is such an issue for all of us. And it just kind of brings me back and Barry back to when we first met. And how do we know this is God's will for us? How do we know this individual is the direction that God wants us to go? I mean, God brings people into our lives for 10 minutes, and some for 20 years, and some for your entire life. I mean, and every person that he brings into our lives has a specific purpose that God wants to teach us something about ourselves, about them, but mostly about him and his relationship with us. So it's really hard as a person. I find it difficult as a person to get myself out of the way and just let God's will be done in any given situation. And it is a practiced thing. It is something that I work on every single day. When I wake up in the morning, what is God's will for me today? What is God's will in my relationship with him, in my relationship with my husband, in my relationship with my bandmates or my friends? Um, the key is getting out of the way so that
Absolutely.
he can teach whatever he has in mind for
I
us.
need to just pipe in here because when I met Linda, okay, the way I met her, the man who is now our three-piece partner, we most of our gigs are as a three-piece, and the other guy that plays in our three-piece, and then we can expand to a four or five, whatever the client might want. But most of the time, we play as a three-piece, and our partner is the one who introduced me and Linda. And the way it happened, I was playing with another band many years ago, and they came to the gig that I was playing. We were playing in this place. It was a country western place. I was playing in a country band. And I had played with Dennis many, many years earlier, and he recognized me. He says, "Hey, I know that guy." So he brought Linda up, and on our break, he introduced her to me. And I said hi, and then they, went their way at some point. Well, some months later, I don't know how long later, I'm playing again somewhere else, and Linda is there. So she comes up and says hi to me, and I don't remember her. So- Some first impression, huh? And she starts talking to me like, "Hi, so how you doing? What you up to?" I'm like, "Do I know you?" And of course, she was very kind and understanding. And oh, I met you with Dennis. You remember the Dennis who? Oh, yeah, you're that girl. Oh, hi. Well, what you doing? What's going on? So then, now that's bad enough. It's like, by the way, this is your future wife here. You might want to remember her. Um, there's no way I knew that. So the same thing happened, like, how many times?
5.
She says five times. I don't remember it being that
It,
many,
it was
but
5 times. Yeah.
literally every time
Well, by the
time would
fifth
go
time,
by.
the fifth time you actually remembered me. It's kind of
So if
embarrassing.
God wants you to be with somebody, guess what?
They're going to be put in your path.
He kept having to say, "Okay, I'm going to introduce you again." And I could tell a whole long story about how it finally ended up,
Exactly.
he practically had to hit me over the head. But
Exactly.
if you're meant to be with somebody, he'll make sure it happens. And it became
Absolutely.
so obvious to me when it was time that I was trying to convince her, "Oh man, he's just making this really clear that we're going to be together." And she's like,
Absolutely.
"Oh, you'll be tired of me in a week, That's what
So, this issue of whether or not a person is God's will is something that many people struggle with. I mean, relationships are just the nature of that. And the greatest advice that I have for anybody who's struggling with relationships would be that God's not going to fault you if you don't recognize the person who's put in your path 5 times. He's not going to fault you He's just going to keep putting that person in your path. If it's somebody as important as your spouse, like it was in Barry's case, God's going to keep putting that person in your path.
Well, one thing that you should know is both Linda and I, for however long, while we were single, and I wasn't married prior to Linda, so you can't help but every time you meet somebody new, you wonder, could this be somebody that could end up being for me? And you're always looking, you're always asking God, Lord, is this the one? Is this the one?
Right.
And she was doing that, and every time, and so was I, and we were both always hearing, no, 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 this isn't the one. Oh, how come? What's wrong with this one? And finally, God told us both, this is the one. And Linda was like, really? Well, does he know you? Because she wanted a godly man.
Right.
And
His answer to me was, compared to your relationship with me, Linda, Barry has, he has you beat 100 times over. Meaning that the answer to my question of, is this a godly man, and somebody who knows you more than I do, or can be a leader in the relationship, because that was really important to me, that, the husband is the head of the wife. That's God's economy. That's the way that God works. He has an infrastructure that has almost a military infrastructure where there's a hierarchy. There are generals. There are, soldiers and foot soldiers and all that stuff. Well, in relationships, he has established a hierarchy for a male-female relationship. So when God said to me, yeah, Linda, he knows me. He knows me much better than you do. It was like, wow, awesome. This is so awesome. I was really happy to hear
keep
that.
in mind, it's a relationship based on love. So that, remember how Jesus said, don't lord it over one another, not like the world? Just because God sets up a hierarchy, the Bible says, husbands, love your wives even as Christ also loved the church, Ephesians 5, and gave himself for it, that he might sanctify her and cleanse her and present her to himself without spot or wrinkle, the washing of the water of the word. So I find that it's almost a reluctant thing. I don't like being the head, because that means I'm responsible spiritually for the relationship and the direction that we're both going to take. But it's not so much like hey, I'm in charge here. No, it's nothing like that.
No,
It's the same way that Jesus receives his directions. Everything Jesus did, he said, I only do what I hear the Father tell me to do.
yes.
Everything the Father tells me to do, that's what I do. And I'm constantly looking to Linda for checks and balances.
Yes.
Here's what I'm getting. Are you getting this too? So we're very good. And if I'm weak, she's strong. It's amazing. If she's weak, I'm strong.
Yes.
And it's kind of like it's a partnership
it is.
based on a hierarchy, whatever the proper word is,
Exactly.
in which ultimately I'm going to be held accountable for the final decision, but I never make it without, but when I say accountable, as goes my relationship with God, so goes the relationship. Heck, we could talk all day about that.
Yeah,
So that's a deep subject. So I just want it to be understood that it's not as the world would do and take advantage of something
Yeah.
like that. It's more like how Moses was chosen to be a leader among the Israelites, but he didn't even want to do it. And I remember when we got married, and I suddenly realized God was saying, "Guess what? You're the spiritual leader of this relationship." And I'm like, no, she's good too. I don't. It's a reluctant feeling. It's like, well, you feel the importance of that position, but then you also realize, wait a minute, I don't have to make any decisions. Jesus is my head.
That's right.
As the husband is the head of the wife, Jesus is the head of the man. So that lets me off the hook. I don't actually make any decision. I look to him and say, okay, Lord, then where are we going? Which way are we turning on this one? And then I wait for him. He gives me an answer because he gets it from the Father. He gives it to me. I give it to her. And then we both check it with the Spirit. And we say, oh, yes, and there's your Trinity right there, And when we dwell together in unity, oh, how good and pleasant it is for the brethren to dwell together in unity. And I could tell you stories after stories where things work out very harmoniously when you operate in that way.
Yes.
You're not fighting each other. You're not bucking the system. You're not saying, well, I wanted to go this way. And you just, I'll never forget when I was younger and I read the words of Paul. This is even after I thought I had completely surrendered my life to God, but there were areas of my life that hadn't yet been surrendered, that I was still guarding over, saying, no, no, this part's mine. And I didn't know I was doing it until God presented me with this scripture where Paul said, for me to live is Christ and to die is gain. And I'll never forget, I was at my ranch work job. I was working labor and saying, well, I don't know if I could ever really do that and mean it, Lord. You mean there's actually some people who could present themselves that much of a living sacrifice to where they could literally say, this day, not my will, Lord, but your will be done on everything. And whatever you say goes. And as far as I'm concerned, as long as I'm alive, it's for Christ and his will in my life. And if I die, well, that's even better, because then I'm in heaven. And I thought, oh, Lord, I would love it if I could ever sincerely mean it and get to that
Yes.
place.
Yes.
Well, now I live that way step by step, moment by moment, and it is a joy to live like that. It's not a burden. I was actually in more of a burden doing it my way, working at a job I didn't even like,
Right.
because I wouldn't ask him, well, is this what I'm supposed to be doing? And maybe part of the time it was, but there was a time when he said, okay, let's move on to, what you're supposed to really be doing now, something I created you to do, which is something you enjoy.
Right.
And being married to somebody you're going to like, even love, it's not a burden. It's his yoke is easy, his burden is light. Okay, I just wanted to say that.
So then that kind of brings us around to the beginning of this conversation. It's like, how do I know this is the right person for me? How do I know that, God's in this relationship? And it comes to this. It's a daily revelation from him. Sometimes it comes all at once, but mostly it's a daily revelation, meaning that every day when you wake up, it's all about placing all of these concerns before God and saying, what are the answer? What is the answer to this person, this relationship? And then waiting on him.
Because it's a test. The ultimate relationship for all of us is our relationship with God. And God is more concerned about your relationship with him than he is with your relationship with anyone down here.
Truly.
If you notice, the Ten Commandments begin, the first 4 are about our relationship with God. The last 6 are about our relationship with each other. And if we have a right, proper relationship with God, the rest of it will work out. That's why it says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and your neighbor as yourself. And God will test us with little things to see whether we really want his best, or are we just sort of like playing at that and then going to do what we want anyway. So he'll put
Exactly.
little things in our path and tell us what he wants us to do and see if we will obey him. And he might be testing us, like when he said, hey, Philip, where can we buy bread? And Philip's like, are you kidding me? Do you know how much bread it would take, how much food it would take to feed all these people? It's when he fed the 5,000. And it says this, Jesus said to test him. He wasn't really going to, because Philip was from that place. Hey, you're from this neck of the woods. Well, is there any 7-Eleven around here? We could go get something to feed these people. And Philip's like, you know how much money it would cost? And Jesus was probably laughing, oh, come on, Philip. Yeah, but anyway, my favorite part of that whole thing is when they were done and Jesus asked them later, when they were concerned that because they thought they forgot to bring food again. And Jesus, come on, you guys, how many baskets did you have left over of food after that incident? 12. Each disciple had his own basket. And one day it occurred to me, I just feel like I should throw this in there because I didn't say it yesterday or the other. It occurred to me one day, where did the baskets come from? There was never any mention of baskets. Anytime I've ever heard people talk about the feeding of the 5,000, it started with one basket. And nobody carries empty baskets out into the wilderness just in case somebody multiplies food.
Yes. Exactly.
I think what happened is it started with one basket. And as they were passing it out, somebody set the basket down and someone else picked it up. And when they turned around, they each had one. And so on and so forth until each disciple so he didn't just multiply the food, he multiplied the baskets too. And that was the question. He didn't say how much food did you have left over, he said how many baskets. And the reason I'm saying that is because every time I've ever been concerned that God's not going to come through and there's not going to be enough, he says to me, Barry, how many baskets? And it's become a thing for me and him. He says, Barry, Lord, 12 baskets. Do you think I can't take care of this too? I can multiply baskets as well as the food that was in the baskets. So that each disciple said, well, what are we going to do with all this leftovers now? Everybody's had their fill, and we got 12 baskets of food still, you know? So when it comes to God's will, he's going to test us. And he's going to see if we're going to go our own way first. Now, it reminds me, I just want to say this and then I'll let Lynn talk. It reminds me of all things, the TV show that Donald Trump was associated with before he became president, The Apprentice. I hope some of you have seen that show. If you never saw that show, I'll explain it real quick. A group of highly potentialed young people. This is the way it was before it became ridiculous with the Celebrity Apprentice, where they just it became about which celebrity had the most rich friends they could call on to quickly raise the most money. And it was a shadow of its former self. It wasn't even the same. But in the original concept, Donald Trump was looking for a particular bright, highly potentialed individual that he could make an apprentice in his business world for 1 year or something like that. And it would just set them up business-wise for the rest of their life. And he was choosing people, just like in American Idol or America's Got Talent, who would never get this shot otherwise. Bright people, but just aren't in the Gulf Stream of opportunity. They would never get this opportunity to work for someone like Donald Trump if it wasn't for a show like this. So it was called The Apprentice, and all he did was chose these bright men and women, young men and women, just fresh out of college or whatever, and that were looking for a career, a future. And then he put in front of them tasks. And he would say, your task for this time is to do this. And it was a difficult task that required all of them. There was 2 teams. They started out with 2 teams. They all had to work together. They had to pick a project leader, and they had very specific goals to accomplish in these tasks. And whoever accomplished it the best at the end, that team won, and the project leader was rewarded, and the whole team got to go back to their suite and watch the other team suffer some sort of punishment, and somebody would be fired. That's where that "you're fired" came from. So if you saw the show, you know what I'm talking about. If you didn't, that basically in a nutshell was what would happen. Well, the reason I bring that up is because our lives on this planet are very much like that show. God is looking for people ultimately that he can entrust with his entire kingdom. He wants to know that he can give authority and responsibility to you and me when we get there. We're not just going to play harps all day. We're going to have an authority. We're going to rule and reign with Jesus Christ in some fashion. And to get to know who we can trust with his kingdom, he's going to put us through tests down here with things that really matter to us. And one of them is who's going to be our life partner, or who we're going to spend our time with and be part of in our lives. Who's going to be in our lives. And so I just wanted to add that it's a very important thing to us and to God, what we do with our lives each day.
Anyway, so from my perspective, I felt a pressing for him wanting to talk about the subject of relationships. And I say that with the emphasis that I said it because of the fact that relationships are such a big part of life here on earth. And there's a reason for it. God has his reasons for putting certain people in your path. My advice, I guess what I'm getting to is this. In every day and in every way, we are to take everything to prayer, to God. If a person is in your life and you don't know why, you don't know what path to take with this individual, just know that God does. And my greatest advice to you is to take it to prayer to him and then wait. One of the greatest examples of waiting on the Lord that I've ever heard was described by my husband. And I'm not saying this just because he's my husband. I'm saying this because it gives you a really good example of what waiting on the Lord means. Okay? And here it is. You're in a restaurant and you're sitting at a table and you're looking at the menu and the waiter walks up to you and says, "What can I get you?" That is how we are to approach God with any given issue. You're not the person ordering. You're the waiter. And you're presenting your issue to God
You give God the menu.
and you say, God, what is it you want to do with this situation? So
And then you
you're a
wait.
waiter waiting on a table, and you wait for God
And
to
whatever
say to
he
you.
says, I want this, I want that, I want this other, and I want, it done this way. You don't say, well, I don't feel like doing that. I wanted to do this instead. Like Peter. You're not washing my feet, Lord. Well then this relationship's not going to work out. You're supposed to be the one waiting on me, and if I have to wait on you, you know what I'm saying? If I have to do what you want, then it's like the customer just got up from the table and the waiter sat down and starts telling the
Customer.
advice. They switch roles. And
Exactly.
that's what I learned when I was growing up. I heard waiting on the Lord was me asking God for something and then waiting for him to bring it to me. That's backwards, which Paul said we see through a glass, meaning a mirror. We get everything backwards. We try to make God our waiter, and we're supposed to be waiting on him.
Absolutely. So when you've got an issue as powerful as a relationship, you take it to God and you say, Lord, here's the situation, here's the person. What is it you would have me do?
Hmm.
And then you wait. You wait and you wait.
Now,
And
God also uses circumstances that are beyond our control to present a scenario where the right people will either get into our life or get absent from our life. There was a girl I nearly married before Linda. And in fact, we hadn't set a date, but we set a season. I went to my dad. She wanted me to go to our pastor and my dad and discuss uh, setting a date and getting married and making plans. But it was November. So we're just coming into the holiday season. It's not a good time to start setting a marriage date right at that time. So my dad's advice was, why don't you set a date in either the spring or the summer? That'll give you more time to plan, and we'll be through the holidays, and that. And I thought that made a lot of sense. As soon as I presented that to her, she said, and she didn't really say anything. And later she says, I'm leaving you. And I'm like, what? Well, I had prayed to God. I said, Lord, if this is not the one, don't let anything work out. Don't let it be permanent. I was willing to marry her if that was what God wanted. But I also felt, there were a number of little red flags here and there. But I wasn't going to make that decision. I said, Lord, if this is your choice, I'm good with it. If it is not your choice, don't let it happen. So she left me. And I said, well, what did I do? What happened? She says, you remember back when you said you wanted to take your dad's advice and set a date in the spring or the summer? And I went, yeah. She said, well, I just knew right then that you were never planning on marrying me. I might as well just leave. And I'm like, wow. So I didn't orchestrate anything. I just let God have his choice. There was another example that keeps coming up. God wants me to mention this. I had a good buddy all the way back to my high school days who we bumped into each other. We were both singers. He was a really good singer and a songwriter. And I started running into him here and there. And he would tell me about this gig he's playing. Why don't you bring your guitar, show up and play with me at my gig? So I didn't do it. And then we run into each other again weeks or months later. And he says, no, really, bring your guitar. I'm over here. So I did. And it was so good. The music that, the way I play guitar fitted in with what he does. He didn't need me, but what I didn't take from it, added to what he was already doing. So we started playing gigs together. And for a while there, we were quite a little duo, around town, and made an impression. And it looked like it was going to go somewhere. Well, it didn't. But after things we went our separate ways again, this is like years, he was trying to contact me, and the phone number he left on my answering machine was garbled. Somehow only half the phone number came through, so I wasn't able to call him back and that was before caller ID. This is a long time ago. So it was just a garbled message on my... Well, he calls back a few days later with a very angry message. Some friend you are, I know how it is. You won't help a friend in need, so you're no friend at all. Goodbye. Boom. And he hangs up, and I never heard from him again. Well, I wondered, Lord, what was that all about? God let me know there's sometimes he doesn't want somebody who would be destructive or a bad influence or whatever the reason. He did not allow that phone number to be on my machine because he knew I would have called him back. And he probably needed a place to stay or for whatever reason.
and this brings me to what he just said to me right before Barry started talking. Please keep in mind that no good thing will he withhold from you. If this relationship or this individual, this person is supposed to be in your life, and it is a good thing for you, there's no way that it will be kept from you. But if this is something that is not God's will, God's going to make sure that person is withheld from you, just as it was in Barry's situation where the
Well,
phone
only
number
if you
was
choose
garbled.
that. God will put, see, like Abraham and Hagar, the devil is very good at suggesting a very bad choice. Oh, you're supposed to make a baby with Hagar. And to this day, the consequences are still with us in the Arab-Israeli conflict, you know? So bad choices can be really bad if you insist on going. And Abraham tried to explain to God, see, I have a son already. And God said, nope, that's not your son. And then later when he says, take your son, your only son, Isaac, and offer him for a burnt offering. Abraham's like, my only son? No, you forgot. I got Isaac over here. I got Ishmael over here. Nope, God did not recognize Ishmael as a son of Abraham. I'm sorry if that's controversial. See, it's still controversial to this day. But that's the way the Bible presents it. That's the way I believe it. So,
My point, again, is the same one. If it is something that is in God's will for you, no good thing will be withheld from you. So, what I'm trying to say is take everything to prayer. Take every relationship to prayer to God, and He will reveal to you what it is that He wants you to have. Um, take it to Him as a waiter takes an order from a customer in a restaurant, and then wait on Him and see what God's answer is for you. And I can only encourage you that whatever the wait and whatever the issue is, God will reveal to you what it is He wants you to do, because He's waiting on you to take everything to Him in prayer.
and be cautious that when he does reveal his will, it might be something you don't want to do. Like the hairdresser who says, why would God ask me to give him back something he gave me? It might be something that we don't want to do because he's testing us. Abraham didn't want to offer Isaac as a living sacrifice, or as a burnt offering. He didn't want to do that. But he knew that God could raise him from the dead, and his faith was so great that in a type, it was like he had already killed him in his mind. He'd already done it in his heart, so he could prepare himself to actually go through with it.
Yes.
And I want you to know, I've probably said this in one of my other videos, it's not something that you do lightly. Abraham didn't think he heard a voice
Yes.
and have to report back to Sarah when she says, okay, tell Isaac, wash your hands for dinner. Funny you should mention that. You see, I thought I heard this voice. I could have swore he said I was supposed to. You're just not going to believe this. You're just not going to believe what I thought I heard. No, he knew it was God, and he just knew that God could raise him from the dead. And when God tells you, guess what? There is a weird knowing when God talks to you. And Jesus warns us. Those who know God's will and don't do it will be beaten with many stripes.
Yes.
So you're better off. This is what Keith Green said to me in that audience, if you heard my other video. If you're not willing to do God's will once he reveals it to you, don't even participate in this, because he will reveal his will to you. And if there's something he wants you to do and you're not willing to do it, you'd be better off not to know
Yes.
than to know and not be willing to do it. Because Jesus said, if you don't know the Father's will and you don't do it, you'll still be beaten, but with fewer stripes, whatever that means. I had an acquaintance, I'm just going to leave it at that, who wanted to know whether I was truly of God or not. Because at this time, we were very young, and many of the churches, we would go to different churches, and I didn't get along with the leadership of these churches, not through any fault of my own. There was something about me they didn't like. And I know what it was. It was the relationship with God that I had that they themselves didn't have. So they just said, well, he's off. There's something about, he claims God talks to him. He's dangerous. It was like that. So this person wanted to know, is Barry right, or are the leaders of this church right? Because they can't both be right, and I don't know which one. I can't find any fault with Barry, and yet why would the church leaders not sign off on what he's claiming he has this relationship. So this person seriously wanted to know. And she prayed to God earnestly all night one night. She called me the next day, said, "You're not going to believe what happened." She said, "I wanted so bad for God to tell me the truth of this matter. Were you right, or was the pastor or the leader, the teacher at church right?" And God woke me up or kept me up all night and told me, first thing he said was, "Barry's right. He has a genuine relationship with me. He knows me, and that teacher does not." And then he started asking me and showing me all these things. And among the things that he was talking to me about, he asked me a question. I don't want to go all into this, but he basically told her, "You can have what Barry's having. You can know me like Barry knows me. But I want something I want you to do." And he gave her, I'm not even going to say what it was. He gave her a task, and guess what? She was unwilling to do it. And this same person ended up leaving God, choosing a lifestyle that was so ungodly, ultimately. She ended up divorced from her husband, and she went a way that was so into the world. She went right back into the world, left all church, everything. And I don't know where she is to this day, but the point is, careful what you ask for. He will reveal it to you. And if you're not willing to do what he asks, because there's no neutral.
Right.
She had the goldenest opportunity I ever knew. She said, "I want to know, is Barry genuine or not?" And she found out. Yes, he's genuine. Now, would you like to also have what he's having? "Well, let me get back to you on that. I don't know if that's for me or not. It might just be more than I was looking for. Come to think of it, I think I hear my mom calling. I gotta go." Boom. Be careful what you ask for. If you want to get right with God, if you want to get serious, it's the best thing you could ever do. But he may ask you to do something that you wouldn't want to do. It's the best thing. Do it anyway. Do it anyway.
Yeah, do it anyway. Faith, Rapture Kitty said this, faith is hard. It's not for everybody. This walk with Christ
It should be.
is not for everybody. They don't have the fortitude to walk with him daily. They don't have the fortitude to be, rapture centric.
Jesus
and
said
to
that
be Jesus
the path is
centric.
narrow. Few there be that find it. It is, when I come back, will I even find faith in the earth, the
Yeah.
faith? It is the few that are willing to do what he actually instructs us to do. Because the first thing I began to learn this is so many years ago when I was still young living at home, the first thing I began to know is exactly what Jesus said would happen to you. No servant is greater than his master. If they did these things to me, mistreated me, then they're going to mistreat you.
Yeah.
They're going to hate you without a cause. They're going to put you out of the synagogues and the church services and say there's something wrong with you. Don't worry about it. You're doing right. When it happens to you, rejoice. Great is your reward in heaven. And so when I began to see it happening to me, I marveled. My own dad, who I thought was the strongest Christian I ever knew, he was the one who taught me. We would have Bible studies around the table at dinner time. He was always spouting verses and telling us how it is. And when he started criticizing me, "Oh, Barry's too holy for us," I'm like, what? What? How could this be? I thought he'd be thrilled at my new choice to follow God right. He was my biggest detractor. He didn't like it at all. "What are you trying to pull, son? Who do you think you are?" And that's what pastors would say to me. And they'd say, "We should take you outside and stone you right now. You're a false prophet. You're a false this, that, and the other." And I'm like, "Lord." He goes, "I told you this was going to happen." I'm like, I had no idea it meant like this. So, yeah, few there be that find it. It's not an easy road to take God seriously. It's easy to play at church and get everybody thinking you're this, that, or the other. But when you start actually having a relationship with the true and living God in your life, Jesus said it's like if you're shallow, if there's rocks in your soil, when the persecution starts happening, I'll tell you what it was that God told this girl. He told her he wanted her to stop going to that church she was going to. And she wasn't willing to do it. Because she knew the first thing that's going to happen is all her friends at that church are going to say, "Why aren't you coming to church anymore?" And her answer is going to be, "God told me not to go." And they're going to say, "Oh my God, you've got Barry's cooties." You got the same thing that happened to him. You're weird. Why would God tell you not to go to church? That's not God. That's a devil. Well, guess what? It was God. He was testing her. And so she didn't do it. She said, no, what? You know. And the weird thing is, the way I found out about this, she didn't just come out and tell me that. She asked me a question. She said, oh, in the course of God talking to me all night, he asked me a question. And the question was, why did the Israelites worship the golden calf? And I don't know the answer. Do you know the answer? And as soon as she said that, I heard God say, okay, smarty pants, to me. I'm asking you now. He didn't say it mean. He said it very, very lovingly and kind. He had a great big smile on his face. And he said, okay, Mr. Bible man, I'm going to ask you now. Why did the Israelites worship the golden calf in the wilderness? And I went, oh my gosh, I don't know that. I've never even heard that. I never even thought about that. That's a great question. I don't know. And so I was trying to come up with, it seems like a really dumb thing. You've been watching God operate right before your eyes, doing miracle after miracle after miracle, and the minute Moses turns his back and goes up the mountain for a few minutes, relatively speaking, they go right out and start worshiping a golden calf. That is so dumb. Why would they do that? And I thought, that is such a good question. But I didn't know the answer. What? I don't know why. So then I began to really want to know the answer. And so did she. And we were both left scratching our heads. So I remembered a little principle. God never asks a question like that unless it's for a purpose, to bring out a point. He's making a point about something. So I said, do you remember, to this girl, what it was that caused God to ask the question in the first place? And I didn't think she'd even remember. And she goes, oh, absolutely. She immediately knew right away. Oh, absolutely. It was right after he told me he wanted me to not go to church anymore, go to that church anymore. And then she asked, well, you're God, why would you not want me to go to church? That doesn't make any sense. And that's when he said, why did the Israelites worship the golden calf? As soon as she said that, I just went, oh, I got it now. And she's like, what? How did that help you get it? Don't you see? Church is you and God, and then even like right now, 2 or 3 gathered together in Jesus' name. That's church. You're having better church with God because he's talking to you than you ever will get at a brick and mortar building where some pastor thinks he's going to teach you something. If he's not teaching you this, how to talk to God and hear him, what he wants to tell you in your life, personal, one-on-one, then it's not as good as what you're getting. So you're already in church. This is all the church you need. And he's going to give you a task you can do that's going to be seemingly wrong to you, to see whether you obey it or not. And if you obey it, your relationship with God will grow, but you will also gain the anger and the wrath of those who are just pretending to be Christians. They're going to hate you without a cause, and they're going to call you names. They go, oh, you backslider, look at you. You're acting like Barry now. You've got Barryitis. You've been hanging around him too long. And she's going to say, you know what? Barry knows God, and now I know God, and you guys are just playing church. And they're going to say, hold up a cross. She's of the devil. Look, Barry influenced her. She's gone off the deep end just like Barry. That's exactly what God wanted to happen, to see whether she would choose God or go back to church and say, no, I like these friends. I like church. I like these people. So what was the golden calf all about? When they got into the wilderness and Moses was up on the mountain for 40 days, they said, as for this Moses, we don't know where he's gone. So let's just go back to what's familiar with us. Let's just, they worshipped golden calves in Egypt.
Okay, I have a background in psychology, and one of the things that I understand about the human nature is people stay with what is familiar.
Mm-hmm.
So when Moses, this brand new thing that he brought, which was God, it was old to them, but it was not something they were currently practicing. So when Moses left for 40 days, what did they do? They returned to what was familiar, because that's what human beings do.
So what God was telling this girl, if you go back to that church, they're going to convince you that this relationship that you've got with me going on right now is not the reality that they are. The golden calf will seem more real to you, and you'll call that church. When they worshiped the golden calf, you know what they said? They said, behold, the Lord which brought us out of the land of Egypt. They worshiped the golden calf as though he was their God. And that's what church does a lot of times. I'm just using this as an example, that when God tells you to do something, it's not going to be something you might automatically want to do, and it might seem wrong to you, but it is in order to God wants to weed out of our lives the false golden calves, that we've been relying on, and he wants to become the only God, have no other gods before me, and don't worship graven images. A lot of what goes on in churches is a God before the true God, and it's a graven image. Sorry, but that's just what happens. Because they haven't, sometimes the leadership there themselves have not worshipped, they've not met the true God. He's a living God, and he can talk to you and tell you what he wants to do in your life. And when you learn that and you find that, it changes you, and you become a light to anyone else around. And I had guys, what made this church, this very same church, really, the leadership there started to really not like me, is when the guys that I was hanging around, because I got into the little Christian band, me and some guys that just came up and approached me and said, hey, we want you to play guitar with us. Would you do that? So I started playing guitar with these guys. And I started just naturally talking about God and my relationship with God that I had. And they said, you know what? I learned more in 15 minutes of listening to you talk than all the sermons and teachings that I've gotten all the time that I've been to church, where all I do is write down a little outline and it goes in a drawer and I forget about it and never think about it again. But you talk like somebody who really knows God. And so they started seeing a change on some of these guys that they saw me hanging around. And that's when they said, this guy's dangerous. We can't let him. We don't like him. He shouldn't be here. Who is he anyway? He doesn't go here, you know.
So, having said all of this, I don't want to be Debbie Downer, and I don't want Barry to be,
Freddie Downer.
Freddie Downer. But the
No, it's
truth of the
actually
matter
up. It's
is,
up. It's the greatest thing in the world when you start
The
trusting God.
the truth of the matter is that it is a path that, in looking back on my years of having done this, put into action what I'm recommending you do, it is beyond worth it. And I say that because I'm being very objective in terms of the pain that I've gone through in my life and the trials
Oh,
that
yeah.
God has put me through, as opposed to the payoff. I have to say, labor is very similar in that it's the wilderness journey is exceedingly painful as childbirth is, but the end result,
The promised land.
where you wind up, makes that path, that difficult, that pain, so much more worth it.
And as Mark Verkler pointed out in one of his talks, the Israelites were being tested by God every time he allowed them to think they were going to run out of water or food, or you just brought us out here to kill our children. No, I brought you out here in the wilderness to test you. And they kept flunking the test. You brought us out, there's no water. What are we going to do? They're supposed to say, well, the Lord will provide water. He's our God, and we have him, so we're okay. And once you learn that, then you find things get a lot easier. But if you don't learn that, it's really difficult, because if you keep failing, he just has to test you all over again. So me and Linda, when we first got together, we weren't like we are now. And we were looking to each other saying, what do you, I was asking God, give me a woman that will do this journey with me. I don't want to do this alone. I want somebody that will go through this faith journey together with me. And we had to teach each other that it's okay to trust God and that it's the best. You want to try this? Okay. And I was telling her how to do it, and she started doing it before I was. And I'm like, how are you doing that? And she says, what do you mean? I'm doing what you told me. And I was like, well, yeah, but I haven't really tried it to that degree yet, So we taught each other to trust God. I mean, really, the tests kept going after we were together, and we started doing them together, and coming to the conclusion that it's the best choice to just trust God completely with everything.
Yeah.
And we've never looked back.
And you know how it started? It was just with something small. I was too afraid to start with the big stuff.
Oh, that's
trusting
how God
with
is.
the big stuff.
Yeah.
So I started with just a small thing, something that I was willing to, quote, risk.
Yeah.
And, because I was I'm a recovered control freak. When I made a commitment to place an issue in God's hands, I started small because I was willing to give up control of that. And what I mean control is I gave up any opinion for the outcome of that issue. I decided to be neutral on it and to let God decide the outcome. Now, usually when we're giving up issues, and executing or acting on faith with a particular issue, usually we have a desired outcome. Lord, please bring me a brand new car. As opposed to, Lord, I'm in need of a vehicle. You decide if I get a vehicle, and if I do get a vehicle, whether it's a brand new one or a used one or a hunk, a pile of metal ready to fall apart, or something that's brand new off the lot. You see, I gave up my desires. I said, here's a need, and you decide the outcome of it. And I started with something small. I tell you, to this day, I do not know what that was. Now, and in fact, I was the first one to put to test this preaching that Barry was talking about. And Barry had not done it yet in his life, but I was beginning to manifest it in mine.
Well, I had been doing it, but I didn't do it consistently. I still hemmed and hawed. No, I don't want to do it this time. I don't want. Why should I have to? It's so easy to drag your feet and not want to do it again. But I was doing it before I met Linda. I had bought a pickup truck. The first time I ever bought a vehicle on financing. Usually, I saved up my money and bought a little crummy car that will get me there, but wasn't much to write home about. And finally, I had a good enough job. I was working steady at the ranch, and I wanted to get something a little newer and a little nicer. So I got a 3-year loan and paid consistently, faithfully every month, and I had one payment left to make, and then this truck would be mine. It was a Toyota pickup truck, not very old, so it was really, really nice. And it got stolen right out from under me on a street, and I came out to nothing but a pile of glass from the window they broke to get in. And I was so distraught and so bummed out. And God immediately said to me, trust me with this and it'll all be good. Well, I didn't want to trust him. I mean, I was like, couldn't you, how did you let this happen?
So these were the examples that Barry was preaching to me about, and the end result was good, blah, blah, blah. So I decided, wow, I'm going to start with something. I'm going to try this faith thing. And when I decide to try something, I give it 100%. I don't say, well, I'm going to give this issue to God and then pull the issue back. I decided I'm going to do this and see. I'm going to be like a good researcher. I'm going to watch the empirical evidence. I'm going to watch the results of my action of taking an issue and faithing it. And one experience led to another experience, led to another experience, and all successful.
Yeah, that's what happened. I got to finish this. I'll just tell it real quick. So ultimately, I decided I would trust God with my vehicle. And I decided that the only way I could come out good is either I get my vehicle back better than it was, or God gives me, because I'd paid, faithfully for 3 years on this vehicle, and it was paid off, one more payment, which I still had to make either way. And I said, Lord, the only way this can come out good is I either get my truck back the way better than it was, or you get me a equivalent. You just give me somehow, because my dad was saying, well, son, maybe you just better buy another puddle jumper, he called it, just something that'll get you there. So I was even already starting to look at used cars that I could afford, and I thought, no, I don't accept this, Lord. If I end up in something like this and a piece of junk after I paid for a car all these years, the 3 years, then you failed me. I end up ashamed because you said trust you and it would come out good. So I'm trusting you with this. And he brought up David in the Bible. When David and his men were fighting a battle and they came back to their camp and all their stuff was gone. The wives, the women, their goods was all spoiled. Their camp was gone. And his men were ready to stone him. And David cried out to the Lord, what did you let this happen for? Which is exactly how I felt. I turned my back for not 1 hour, and my truck was stolen in that 1 hour. Why did you let this happen? And God said, trust me, and you'll come out better than you were. And that's what David did. He said, men, look, trust God. And he went and found the people who stole their stuff, and not only got everything back, they spoiled that people and got twice as much as they started with. So God reminded me of that. I said, okay, Lord, I'm trusting you with this. I'm giving you the matter. I'll do whatever you say. Well, guess what? My vehicle was recovered. The insurance paid for everything, and it ended up being better than it was. They fixed stuff that was wrong with it. It ended up better than it was before. And when I got it back, it was like a gift from God. I got that truck back, I was so happy because I heard God say he was going to take care of this, and he did. He came through, which he always does. When you trust him, don't take matters into your own hands. Let God be in charge of it.
Well said. Anyway, so thanks for joining us this morning with our coffee. We hope you have a blessed day. God bless you and keep you, and we'll see you soon.